Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a work session of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Thursday, October 12th, 2023. The time is 7 p.m. Roll call is our first item. Joe Murphy. Here. Paul Jordan.
Here.
Liz Carp is absent. Susan Axelrod.
Here.
Peter DiStefano. Here. Robin Pothier is absent, and Maria Mack is here. Our first agenda item is planning objectives, hot topic items, discussion and follow-up on meeting with Town Council from October 10th. Next steps. Jamie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The primary purpose, I want to say, of this agenda item is follow-up to the meeting that everyone attended on Monday night. So I think it's a general discussion of your takeaways. I do have all of the presentations available, so if someone wanted to go back through the PowerPoint or talk about a specific point or something needs to be expanded, added to continue the discussion, a path you would like to go down, path you never want to go down, something that you're on the fence about. I think this is potentially a good opportunity to kind of debrief from that meeting, because again, as you're aware, Council wants to meet with you again in roughly 3 months. So I will be quiet now.
I think it was a positive meeting. They were all very receptive to our thoughts and comments, and seemed to be of similar mind. They also appeared to understand the need for funding particular initiatives, and seemed very aware, or seemed more aware of staff time and commitment.
Just say, I think one of my takeaways was we're asking the planning staff to do too much. You know, when I think about our list of priorities, and I think we had this conversation before about, I don't know if it's picking the
January.
low-hanging fruit or, yeah, you know, grabbing a couple and saying, okay, what can we realistically get done? Because we've got so many great ideas, and I know we ranked them last year, but we can't do it. You know, it's either got to be done by staff or by a consultant. So I think this year we're going to have to really think about
Exactly.
a couple of big priorities and say the other stuff will.
And also think about how, as we mentioned on Tuesday, how we can perhaps get some assistance from some other boards and commissions with our work product. You know, and since we are, well, almost halfway through October, we should really think about, in our December meeting, we ought to start creating or recreating that list of our work plan for 2024, even if we know it's going to be subject to change of direction or additional items or what have you. I mean, I think some of the things that we'll discuss tonight will fall into that work plan, but
Maria, just to expand on what you just said and what Paul said prior to that, you know, whether you do that in December or January, hopefully maybe one of the, either a regular meeting or a work session will be light, may be good to do that, because if you meet with council in January and you kind of finalize what your anticipated work program is starting July 1 through the next fiscal year, your third meeting with the council, you can potentially share that with them and just say, here are the planning board's priorities. If council changes that or inserts another, to Paul's point, another task on top of these tasks, just understand the things our expectations to finish these top 4 items, that may go to the top of the list and the other 4 items slip, with the understanding that, you know, 2, 3, and 4 may not get done because as council you've decided something else is a higher priority.
you know, that's exactly why when the question was asked, my simple answer was time, capacity, and cost. So I think we'll probably look to you, Jamie, and your staff to, once we develop this list of what items need a consultant, what the time frame for that might be, what the cost would be.
You know, I know moving forward, at least starting November, December, for the next 6 months, Jay has to staff another committee and the stewardship. So there are, another,
Short-term,
it's just, I'm hoping it's a 6-month gig. But again, that's another thing that we haven't been doing for a while, so that means agendas, coordination, reading a document, supporting the consultant, so that, maybe another 10 to 20 hours a month for Jay, that he can't spend that time on. And again, if he falls behind, Brian or I will also pitch in on that one, and I'll try and be actively involved in that also, and attend a few of those meetings. But those are the things that, if there's any slippage in January through June, that may wrap up in July and August. So, and then we're bringing on the Tower Hill Road study. We're going to be probably deeper into American Rescue on our Main Street program because we're done studying and now we gotta initiate.
Yeah, can you explain to us, because we really weren't involved in that process per se, other than the public, 1-2 day portion of it. How exactly is that going to move forward, and what role, if any, does the planning board have in that?
So perhaps in the next 4 weeks, Weston and Sampson will wrap up their final recommendations with some broad cost estimates associated with those for the 5 villages. Those will be presented to council, and from my understanding and discussions with council over the last 12 to 18 months is, in all likelihood, they will pick one potential primary targeted area to initiate those steps, streetscape improvements, landscape improvements, sidewalk, street lighting, hardscape, signage, facade improvements, so that when the resources are spent, someone will see the difference versus, we'll use an example. If we had the ability to do 50 new light poles, do you do 10 in West Kingstown, 10 in Kingston, 10 on 108, 10 in Matunic, and 10 in Peacedale, and 10 in Wakefield, and you may just see 10 lights versus, let's do all the lights, redo all the ones in Wakefield. So when someone looks, they're like, oh wow, someone redid all the lighting and it's really nice in Wakefield. Then you have the ability now to put banner signs or pennant signs on every single light post in downtown. They all look the same. They're not 3 different styles. Same thing with, and one of the council members mentioned it the other night, that as we move into this program too, items like wayfinding, which are signage, a trails grant for signage just potentially is opening up. So if we had $150,000 in that, there may be an opportunity for the town to apply for granting in another program, which means X number of dollars can be diverted. So.
And how does that, say, for example, Main Street, because that was one of the more prominent areas with the ARPA money. How does that fit into the council's overall priorities, do you know?
With everything they're handling?
Yes.
Do it yesterday and spend the money tomorrow. So they really want the programs to hit the street and see the money spent. We spent an awful lot of time in planning. That's usually where you get bogged down. And then a lot, 50%, maybe 40% of what the town wants to accomplish on Main Street is in the public realm. Of that, maybe 30 or 40%, we'll call it 60% public realm. 30 or half of that is within the town's control. 30% requires coordination with the state. Replacing the lights on Main Street are within the state right away. I don't think the state will say, no, you can't. First question, who's paying for it? We are. To me, they should say, okay, we just want to see the specifications meet Rhode Island standard and you can move forward with that. You know, there was an initial discussion of moving the sidewalk on the west side of Main Street out 2 feet. But that is a heavy lift with the coordination and permitting with the state of Rhode Island. I mean, we struggled with a bump out. So RIDOT is going to be improving the crosswalk by the comfort station on the trail. They're only gonna do a bump out on the west side of the street. Because on the right side of the street, it may have required some coordination with a property owner. So instead of taking the time and doing, I don't wanna call it right, but maybe doing it the way you would do it in a perfect world, they're choosing to do half of it.
Pedestrians are not their priority.
Well, you know.
No, because they may have had to tell an abutting landowner that your 30-foot curb cut is gonna become 24, and it's all within our right-of-way, so you have a seat at the table, but in the end, it's our decision. But sometimes state agencies just decide path of least resistance, west side, the abutter is the town. Everything else is in the state right-of-way. We only affect the town and us, so we'll move forward with that side of the road. And the right side of the road, you know, their first comment to me was, storm drainage will be affected. I'm like, no, the catch basin's 30 feet upstream of where the bump out would be. Actually, it would tuck in perfectly with your new proposed bump out without changing anything. So it's like, uh-oh, okay, we've been hiding behind that for a while. Then it's revealed that, well, we don't want to have to negotiate with abutting property owners. And it's not, they use the term negotiate, but it's, you're in the state right away. It's your right away.
Right, exactly. Well, it'd be nice if we could push them a little bit and, you know, prioritize a project like this so that it was done properly from the onset.
And I think later this fall, early winter, we will push out the facade program. It, again, I have to have has to be on the agenda early November, because from our perspective, we have 1.5 million for facade improvements, but do we push that out to 5 villages? Or do we say, dear council, there's 5 villages, you have the preliminary stuff, you've seen all the PowerPoint presentations and presentations from Weston and Sampson, you have $1.5 million, where do you want to spend it?
Plus, it ties in with what economic development's been talking about for the last couple of years. I mean, it's all about Main Street. You
Park, it's all.
do one and do it well, and then move
I
on.
would say if you release $1.5 million, and what I would explain to them in a tactic is, if you had 1.5 million, you make it available for Wakefield. If it's undersubscribed, give me the second place you want me to open it up to. And then maybe it's Peacedale. So if you put 1.5 out there and only 1 million in grant apps come in, I have $500,000, we don't shift gears, we just go to the next village.
I think
priority.
what we don't want to see, and you see this everywhere, particularly in old factory towns, it seems, is a bunch of new posts with some fabric banners hanging from them saying, you know, welcome to Peacedale, or, you know, established in, it's like, you know, they're going to be torn to shreds in about 6 months, and it's just do a really good project in one place that makes a difference, rather than spending a lot of money hanging up some cheap signs. So,
Once the decision is made, what entity will be responsible for the administration of all of this?
It will potentially be divided between the town manager's office, the planning department, and public service. So, with the overriding oversight coming out of the town manager's office.
So, we move on. Can I just ask what our collective role would be moving forward on that project?
With regards to, again, this has been a council initiative, so providing input through staff allows me to tailor presentations and insight to the town council. So every time you speak individually or collectively as a planning board, that may be in the back of my mind to, you know, I'm hearing from some of you, like, make a splash I haven't heard anyone say, nah, spread it out in all 5 villages, right? So if I'm working with the council on a presentation, and whether you guys want to take a formal vote or, through consensus, I would purport to the council that there appears to be a sentiment amongst at least the planning board and planning staff to spend the money in one specific area where you can see the most effective change instead of a little bit of sprinkling everywhere. So just simple comments like your comments here tonight will get filtered and go down. I'm not sure that the town council is gonna set up a process where anyone other than themselves have approval participation. I don't, or insight, it will ultimately be their decision.
So I understand the sentiment of making a big splash in one location. But let's just say there were some fairly simple fixes, like Peacedale has no safe way to get across the road, and if you throw a little money there, you could have an impact to that neighborhood by fixing a thing. Can it be spread out that way so that critical things could happen in some parts of town that actually would be an improvement to those neighborhoods, as opposed to just focusing the whole shebang on one portion of town?
I think part of it is, to your point, Susan, is when we get some of the cost estimates back, to redo the roundabout in Peacedale, you're north of $1 million. And
Maybe a raised crosswalk in front of Jade Bun would save right by the bike
get a
path.
raised crosswalk along the bike path in the middle of Wakefield. One crosswalk past RIDOT. Their solution was to do half a bump out.
People drive by Brickley's at 50 miles an hour. Somebody's going to get hurt.
And I'm a little
I watch
surprised that-
almost daily someone almost get hit crossing by the comfort station
Yes.
because they come out of the easterly side of the bike path, blind to the sidewalk and blind to the road, and then when they're coming west to east, the northern building blocks sight line of the sidewalk. And part of it's the bicyclists because they don't get off their bike when they approach the sidewalk. They roll through the sidewalk. I shouldn't say that. A good majority of the cyclists do dismount and walk their bikes to the crosswalk. But again, there are issues with those crossings as well as the other. I will commend RIDOT on the fact that they are making improvements to every single bike, walk, trail throughout town. They're making improvements. I think it's 16 crossings. New signage, new pavement markings. 2 are getting visual lights that are triggered by an approaching walker or biker. They already put one in on Ministerial Road. That
Could you get a
one's in.
list of that so that we're informed and they can get some credit from us for a change for?
Yeah, so again, and I'm pushing back on Main Street, but RIDOT and the consultant, I want to say from BL companies, the BL or Fuss and O'Neill, they were very good at sitting at the table with us. The town manager's office, Mr. Manny asked me as the director to work directly with RIDOT's consultant, and they literally worked with us on every proposed change we had made or suggestion we had made, with the caveat of the raised crosswalks on Main Street and some of the more permit-heavy and costly improvements.
I'm just a little surprised that not so much the redesign of the rotary itself, but as Susan mentioned, having some kind of a safe way to cross where Jade Bun is, that hasn't already been put into the capital budget, just based on
The state road,
circulation and everything else and safety.
state road. And I'm not saying that in defense of not trying, but it's not, we are having conversations ongoing with RIDOT on improvements in the corridor, being 138, 108 Main Street. And again, we have had discussion with the Commissioner's office about, once our plan is ready, sitting down with them and coordinating the permitting and finances of the projects, because your town manager, with some direction from the council, is all about trying to leverage matching financial funds. So if we have $2 million programmed for Main Street, and it's, we'll say, curb improvements or bump outs, can we find an 80-20, so we can make that 2 million, 2.4 million, without expending any more town funds? Or if it's a $2 million project, make it 1.6 on the town's behalf, 400 on the state's, and now we have 400 to spend somewhere else. And maybe if we can leverage funds on Main Street or even Peacedale, we can do more, or we can do the same, and then take the extra money and move to the next village. So I will say this, Susan, that if you were successful in one place and the community sees that success, I think my past experiences has been is that the town wants to leverage that success and move to the next thing. Because if it worked, say you did Peacedale first, if it worked well in Peacedale and the community was excited about it and the voters were okay with spending the money, then you put it in the capital budget to move to the next village, and you constantly make reinvestments in your community. Public Works is in a predicament on sometimes because they're trying to maintain the system, not necessarily, and John Chalk did, and Rich Bourbonnais tries to. There's money to maintain the system, and there's always a request to improve the system. But in a tight fiscal year, the monies to improve the system usually get cut, and even your ability to maintain what you already have is potentially compromised. So everybody's trying. No one has given up.
And at what point does the state's jurisdiction end relative to High Street and the Rotary and then going into 108?
All state.
Right.
All of High Street, right up to 138 is state.
Kersey Road is what
Kersey is town.
okay.
That was not the state relinquished that at some point in time. That's my understanding. So again, we may have the ability, Kersey's intersection with the yield sign and the lack of a real median there, if it turned into at least a stop on Kersey, it would.
Nobody yields there.
Right.
No, I know, and that's the
They go
thing.
on that corner on two wheels.
So if you have a stop, even if someone rolls through it, that's an enforcement issue, but they're not rolling through it at 25. They're rolling through it at 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, so can I also ask, I guess I'm thinking about the logistics of the ARPA money and the improvements that the town council chooses. Does that mean that, let's say, that pick a neighborhood, let's say Wakefield, and they want new streetlights, new curbing, and new something else. Who designs which lights and which curb, like, who's making decisions about facade improvement and what we as a town want? Are we just looking at what the consultants give us and running with that? Or is there public input or planning board input? Or what if they pick really ugly lights and we're like, well, we could have nicer lights? When do we, as a community or as a planning board, get to weigh in on the choices that we're making as a town?
That I don't necessarily have a definitive answer for you, but there is a sample type of light in Weston and Sampson's material to date. Working with public service in the planning department and the town manager's office, recommendations will be made to council. I may have the opportunity to run that by you in a work session. But again, on this project, I take my guidance from town council and the town manager. I don't think it will be done in a vacuum, but I can't guarantee it won't be done in a vacuum. Again, things are going to need to move quickly.
And I don't mean to imply they don't have nice ideas, but I know that people like to have a say, and
The planning department is making the primary recommendations to council, or to the town manager, and then to council. So I would hope the choices we put before them are appropriate.
I would think that, you know, having the example of Arnold Lumber and Stedman's Bike Shop, that we'd be encouraging, I mean, Main Street is mostly historic buildings, if not entirely, you know, that we're looking toward some sort of restoration, not the sort of thing that you would have seen in the 70s where somebody takes an old building and, you know, clads the front in aluminum,
No.
sheet metal or
So
something.
we will have, so envisioned in the grant program, we have $75,000 set aside for architectural assistance. Each grant, potential grant applicant, not just award winner, every grant applicant, we intend to allow them access to an architect. That architect will be pre-selected, and there may be, you know, upwards of 3 of them based on bandwidth and availability, to guide them, given some of the historic principles in town, so that they're not taking, you know, say we have a building that Peter's here, you know, he has basically residential style windows in most of his building. I don't foresee a grant that would gain a lot of traction where he proposed to, you know, take out 3/4 of his first floor and put plate glass windows in and change the entire architectural appearance of that. You have a lot of storefronts in downtown who are older, and will use the term tired, who have used wood and pine products over the years for some of their trim material, and that needs to be upgraded and replaced. Those are the types of things we're looking to do. Enhance what we have, not significantly turn it into, you know, storefronts that are in the seaport in Boston.
Thanks, Jamie. Certainly, it seems as though a strategic approach would be ultimately more effective than a piecemeal approach in terms of, but again, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. But, you know, council has discussed, if we did one facade in each of the 5 villages and, you know, spent $1 million, you may not even notice that. And again, what's interesting is you have seen a substantial investment by individual property owners on the Main Street corridor. I mean, Peter knows that a grant program may be up and coming, but he started some of the work. Because again, the timing doesn't always exist with the private sector's plans. What? You haven't done all of the work. You're just scraping paint slowly, very slowly.
Jamie, just thinking about things that we have discussed over the last, I would say, year and a half, 2 years, and how we should discuss them as to how they might relate to our kind of action plan once you develop a list. But just things that I have are, we've talked about having a greater degree of flexibility with regard to setbacks from multifamily projects, as well as infill, having criteria that would allow us the flexibility so that waivers weren't necessarily required. You know that I've been talking about the dire need for a redo of the landscape regulations, and we have a local landscape architect who's agreed to work on it. The longer it takes to get that underway, the less ability we have to make projects turn out the way we might like them to be, and the community and the neighbors as well. I also had a question about what is happening with, are we doing anything with any SNAP grants with regard to stormwater, the Saugatucket? We haven't heard anything, so I don't know if there's any
We just had
beyond what we know with the Peacedale project.
town manager's office, planning department, public service, and actually library was involved. It also went out to Parks and Leisure. So the town manager's office is working with their grant consultant and some of the departments on putting together some of the applications. We talked about things as broad as the redo of the parking lot behind the Sheldon block, to improvements to Broad Rock where there's an undersized culvert that in storm events, that road is overtopped. But the Rich Bourbonnais point is, I don't know, without a study of the corridor and the drainage area, I don't know if it's flooding because it's being backed up from downstream, or primarily things flood two ways. They flood from too much flow upstream, and then if there's a restriction downstream, the rise in the elevation of the water course can actually back up and cause the problem, which then restricts the capacity of the culvert that can't handle the increase from the restriction plus the new flow coming down to the restriction. So the SNEEP grant may take the form of an analysis of that drainage area versus the improvement, because the improvement may be premature without doing a full analysis of the study.
And there may be infrastructure bank money for that kind of a study as well, so if you can combine funding
Right.
sources.
So those discussions occurred in the last 2 weeks, Jay? Brian was at that meeting. On the SNEEP grants? Last week, okay.
I think if there's any other kind of thoughts floating around from folks, we should bring up things that we've been thinking about that should at least be considered as Jamie works on developing, or at least initial lengthy list that will get pared down for our annual or biennial action agenda, because the more well thought out that list becomes, the easier it will be to convey that to the council when we next meet with them.
Just on the grant side too, in American Rescue, we have had discussions with Public Service and Parks and Leisure. There's $250, no, I shouldn't say it got reduced. There's a little over $200,000 that's been allocated to improvements at Old Mountain Field. So we just had a meeting with Randy Collins and Beta, because they have some preliminary drawings for the improvements that they're trying to put some price tags to them, and also phase the project. Improvements to field conditions, trail systems, parking surfaces, access, this is kind of a revamp of that park.
That's excellent. Are any of these, once these are actually fulfilled financially and the projects are underway, are these things that could be put on the town website so that the folks in the community know how much good work is being developed
We
for various areas, whether they're recreation or something else?
We have been talking about that, and the difficulties is we're all different departments, right? We're the planning department, we do a lot of things. One thing the town doesn't have is a social media type so we have IT, but IT is the laptops and connecting the wires. IT, in defense of Lori and her department, is not a social media, that's not a part of her department. Some communities, I know when I was with two others, that they had a part-time social media individual who, if you had projects ongoing, created the web pages for them, pushed products, pushed news flashes, did a bunch of those things. In one community, we had, to me, one of the brightest people involved, and we were trying to make that position full-time. In the interim, one of the private schools in the community realized how well our social media platform was going, so they poached that person and offered them full time at a private school, which included education for their kids.
So something to look into. Johnson & Wales has I guess, communications, social media. They've got a whole crew of kids that'll work on logos and, sort of web looks and School U and social media. The Galilee Mission, I'm also on the board on, has our second Johnson Wales intern this year. And no charge to us, and designing pamphlets and a lot of good stuff. So maybe that's an option here.
Well, if you have a contact, I would appreciate that. Even if the town doesn't use it, we could.
Need supervision and reporting and all that, but it can work out very well.
But I really like this idea of having some information that's accessible about what's going on with different projects. Like, we just finished the marina. Everyone online is like, well, what do you think it's going to look like? Because there wasn't a place to see what the finished product would look like and what was going on. And if we start doing anything on Main Street, people are going to want to see what we're doing. There's got to be a way to see what's going on before rumors get started and all that other kind of good stuff. I think there needs to be a place where you can see what's going on.
Thank you, Susan. But again, the discussions we have here get inserted in other discussions at a higher level. I don't let it go in one ear and out the other.
We appreciate that. Is there anything else to add to the wish list? I know it's only October, but.
Say, Joe's being pretty quiet.
One of the things I've been saying over the last couple of years is West Kingston. I still think that we should be looking for better utilization. I'm not sure that's correct terminology, but especially with the transportation hub and some of the changes that's come down. And we talk about infill a lot. And usually when we talk about infill, or we talk about cottage zoning or any of these, we kind of base it on the infrastructure being available, right? I don't know when the future sewer map, when that was developed and how it was developed, but I'm wondering if we should look at that and whether that should be potentially expanded. Maybe expand it to some areas that would have the potential, once the sewers are extended, for those higher densities. So, I think of areas maybe like Frank Ave, where that probably would be a good area for additional development, and the sewers are fairly close, but they don't necessarily extend down. So the future sewer district, looking at that map and looking at that, whether that should be extended to West Kingston, and kind of form-based design for multi-units in town.
Joe, Maria, if I can, just a question on your better utilization of the transportation hub. Are you talking about the new one proposed at URI?
Kingston Station.
When I just mentioned that, I was actually talking about some of the housing regulations that's changed, and that specific regulation that was based off, I think, what they did in Massachusetts. So within a certain distance from the transportation hub, we have to identify some areas. My understanding is that has to be a higher density.
Like TOD, kind of.
Right, that's where public transportation hubs are provided. Amtrak is not necessarily considered that. It has to be regular daily commuter service. So,
What exactly, you mentioned a transportation hub relative to URI?
so URI is proposed with RIDOT coordination, proposing improvements to a bus transfer area in the northwestern corner of their student parking lots. I can pull it up if everybody's interested in the location, if you bear. Yeah. Do you want me to pull up the area? I can pull it up real
So
quick.
they're not trying to get more of the students out of their cars then? They're just trying to,
They're trying to build a better mousetrap as it relates to
circulation with the.
circulation of RIPTA's bus system, the internal bus system, and if anybody wanted to use it as a park and ride lot to, say someone, Susan you wanted to drive to URI, park your car, and then take the bus to the train station because you know it's harder to park at the train station. Where do you do that right now? Right? You can, but you're not aware that you potentially can. So they're building some infrastructure associated with that. So there'd be a building constructed, bathrooms, potential ticketing options, covered waiting areas versus just a bus shelter in the middle of a park.
Right now, you can't, there's no bus that goes between the train station and URI, is there?
Yes, there is.
Because you see kids dragging their suitcases down 138 like every single day.
Because it probably goes 4 times a day. There's 3 or 4 routes. Yeah. No, go ahead, Jay.
There's 3 or 4 routes in town, but I believe only 1 or
Just
2
pulled it up.
services URI.
That's not it, Jay. Go north on Plains Road.
I mean, this is the transportation hub right here, the covered area. Or are they building something? in
No,
addition to that?
that's not it. That's just covered parking. Go north, Jay. Oh, sorry, Brian. So go very at the elbow.
This?
Yep. So if you can zoom in to almost where where your cursor was. So you see a little pad on the left? That's a bus shelter. So they are going to reorientate that and make that a permanent structure. So that is the town of South Kingstown's transportation hub. So the state legislation says around state-identified transportation hubs, you are allowed to go as dense and high as you want. Well, it's all owned by the University of Rhode Island. And our transportation hub and infrastructure investments are being done internal to the campus.
Sorry, to clarify.
So there's no private sector availability unless they did a partnership with the university to do, Joe, what you're talking about, that Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maine, and Vermont are doing. Yeah.
Sorry, so I just want to ask, so I thought this was just shuttle buses to get you up to the top of campus. I can actually catch a RIPTA bus there? And
RIPTA
I'm
bus,
allowed to park, and I'm allowed to
believe-
park there?
RIPTA bus, well, those are the issues.
Like, I don't think I'm allowed to park there.
When RIPTA builds their facility there will be public parking there. And I'll try and get you the preliminary plans if they're releasable.
So Jamie, while we're talking about hot topic items, it would be worthwhile to talk just a little bit about Old Tower Hill Road. I know you mentioned it the other night and said that you thought that within 3 to 4 weeks, the negotiations would be finalized and the consultant would be on board. But is there anything else prior to that that you need from us or that's worthy of discussion other than the fact that, as you know, they need to add landscape, at least some landscape architect, personnel, possibly, soil scientist, stormwater person, because that's such a big component of the TMDL issue we have on Old Tower Hill Road and so ripe for improvement. But is there anything else that you need from the board or that it's worthwhile discussing in relation to that project? Or do we wait until the consultant is on board and we have some kind of an interaction with them?
So again, I played phone tag with them today. They called when I was in a meeting, I called when they were in a meeting. So we're trying to schedule something tomorrow morning. We have to get through the price and scope of services and personnel first. Again, we're initially flying at 100,000 feet, trying to bring it down to boots on the ground. So some of the overriding principles of how deep the team gets at this point in time will be based on scope and price. They have a team that has a broad brush of experience from climate specialists to urban planners who have a lot of experience with the built and unbuilt environment. So I'm relatively confident that they can understand all of those parameters you discussed. I'm not sure about how big the team needs to be expanded, but, we are definitely having discussions regarding that.
Good, and that's why at our work session with the council, I tried to, for lack of a better term, be sure that they understood that we don't want to nickel and dime this project, that we want it to be successful, and we have to put 120% effort into it.
I think one of the big issues, and you would, I think, tend to agree, if they don't clearly articulate a vision that there's buy-in on, whether there's impacts to the landscape, soil, or stormwater, I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but the vision has to somehow get nailed. Or a variation of visions for that corridor. And buy-in from the community. Buy-in by council, because again, in the end, council controls what gets amended in the zoning regulations. So again, my tone may not change much. I am battling a cold tonight, but it is something our department is extremely excited about. This could be something really exciting for the town, too.
Anything else that people feel should be added to the future action agenda list? If not, I guess we'll go on to legal.
Just, Maria, just one more thing. Joe, I will check for you on Amtrak and whether that would qualify for the increased density in the TOD. I'll check. So TOD and Amtrak.
Okay, on to legal and legislative updates. Do you have anything for us?
Well, yeah, I guess I think we should talk about the amendments, and where we are and how we're gonna get there.
Oh, that would be good.
So, I think the first thing, would be talking about the schedule.
Mhm.
Kind of put that together yet or not? About how we're gonna get this to the council before the end of the year, without having to have that meeting on Christmas night for the town council?
So Amy actually just sent us an email today. But she was looking at a tentative schedule of 11/14 work session with the vote on an advisory opinion to TC on 11/28. Introduction or order of notice by town council for 11/27, and a public hearing the 12th, so not quite Christmas Eve, but middle of December. But Maria's gonna get a 6-month extension, right, to the legislation?
Yes, don't we wish?
Have you heard anything new about that?
No, only that there is reluctance to bring it up at this date and time. But I think it's
Only
better
after
than
it's
waiting
too
until
late.
January. I mean, yeah, when it's too late. I think it would take a multi-town effort to try to get that pushed back. It would have to come from the communities, reaching out to their legislators.
And again,
What it's going to take.
we've gone through these legislative changes in other states over time, and, knowing the mix of urban, rural, and suburban, and the staff at some of the suburban and rural towns, If it's similar to Connecticut and Massachusetts, you'll probably have 25% compliance by January 1st, and it'll take another 6 months for the next 25%. And then the remaining 50 will come online somewhere between 6 and 18 months after they were supposed to, just due to staffing. Now, we have some towns that just have part-time staff for 5 to 10 hours a week, and they're handling land use applications.
That said, in Amy's memo, as far as the dates, how many extra meetings would it entail for the board? Because to be realistic, we're not going to get it accomplished in one meeting. So,
Well, I mean,
look how long it took us to go through the beginning of the zoning ordinance.
that's up to you. You spent almost an hour talking about something that doesn't need to be dealt with for 3 months, your next meeting with the council. If you focus on this, there aren't a lot of decisions that have to be made. A lot of this stuff is not a choice. It is directed. You are not going to have a choice as to whether you want to do unified development or not. It's just going to be there. You're not going to have a choice on, comprehensive permits, master plan going away, and so forth. There's a lot of stuff where there isn't really a choice. So, that's why we're hoping, and you've got a good staff here, we're hoping that we would have this all ready for you at the 14th. And we were hoping to use the next hour now to talk about the special use permits, which really are the ones where you do have the most choice to make on the special use permits.
Well, so we, did quite a bit of that at the last work session.
Yep.
But it doesn't get down to the issue of special use permits are there for a good reason, and just trying to make our job easier by changing them to a Y or an N takes away from what the special use permit is supposed to be used for in the first place. It's just because we're put in this situation in which we have to develop criteria for each and every one of them. That doesn't mean it's not worthwhile doing it, which is why we should have more time. But, I worry about the fact that we're just kind of going through it quickly and saying, okay, let's change it to a Y or to an N without enough time to figure out, well, should we really do that? Are we better off with a special use permit? And then how long is it going to take to write the criteria?
I would just like to say, Andy, I don't want to steal. I would just like to say that doing this for a while in 3 different communities, it's kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time. The use codes in all 3 of the communities I've worked in, including SK, could use a refresh. There's a lot of things that really might not be pertinent anymore, but there's also new uses that have evolved over the years that were never anticipated when it was first. And we kind of do it on a reactionary basis, right? Like medical marijuana and those type of things. But there are a lot of use codes that are in there that you might really want to take a second look at and be like, really? Times have changed. Maybe we can relax that a little bit, or maybe we can't, based on the zone that it's in. I'm a little concerned with the outcome of what this is going to do. Now, just to get off special use permits for a minute, one of the things that jumps out at me is the modification. Having started my career in Narragansett doing, I can't even tell you how many hundreds of zoning applications we processed for sheds and decks and the like, going to Westerly, so Narragansett didn't have modifications. Modification now until January 1st was optional for a community. Narragansett didn't have modifications, so it was completely foreign to me. I went to Westerly and I was like, great, modifications. Modifications, they allowed 25% of the required setback to basically get an administrative variance. So if your setback was 10 feet, you could go up to 2.5 feet. You notify the neighbors and you put a letter in the paper. If nobody complains, including if nobody objects to the zoning official, they would get that administrative variance by the zoning official. And it worked, to my surprise, because sheds and decks and the minor projects, the larger projects, we received input from the public, and they went to public hearing. That's the alternative. If you get a complaint, it would go to public hearing. The thing Westerly did very well, though, was that the modifications were limited to setbacks only. The new language in the modifications in the state law allows modification of the dimensional requirements, up to 15%, non-specific. So building height, the 35 feet that we thought was the gold standard for building height, is now going to get pushed to potentially 15%. 35 feet. 37 feet in coastal communities is a disaster, right? People come out of the woodwork, and all the towns that I work in, building height was the biggest thing. I don't know if anybody knows this. Now, I talked to my counterparts last week in Narragansett about it, and they're trying to take some mitigative actions to address that. But that is something that really because that's going to come out of the woodwork. The minute, like January 2nd, somebody comes in with an application down at the beach for a 42-foot house or a 40-foot house saying it's a modification. Well, if they apply in the winter and the neighbors don't happen to get the letter and nobody sees it in the paper because nobody reads the paper anymore, what happens? People are going to come to the town being like, what is that? And be like, sorry, state law allowed it. We couldn't do anything about it. So it's things like that that I think need to get flushed out so that we understand what could potentially happen. Because when the language is so dry, when you read it, you don't really think, unless you're in it all the time, as to what that applies. But when it talks about dimensional requirements, it's all the setbacks, it's your building height, it's your lot coverage, or in this case, building coverage. Granted, I don't know how many topics are of concern like that, but this one certainly is for staff. If the town wants to allow it, that's fine. But the staff, the zoning department and the planning department are going to be the ones hearing about it after construction, and it may not be well received.
And there is nothing that we can do as far as adding language to, for example, lot coverage to help to mitigate that?
So, as I said, one alternative is to reduce our current setbacks by 15%. But that would open up a whole other can of worms, for everyone else.
Yeah, so again, the first knee-jerk reaction is, okay, state mandated that you can go up 15%. We'll reduce all lot coverages, setbacks, and everything by 15%. But then that means, then that means anytime anyone wants to go back to the normal, it requires letters, legal notice, and if someone objects, a public hearing, just to get back to the normal, in Jay's initial example, just to get back to 30 feet. So if we reduced it by 15, right, and made it 25 and a half feet, every time someone wanted to go to what we would always approve of 30, it allows someone to object, requires a public hearing, and actually bogs you down even further.
And I know what Andy's going to say. I know.
But before you say it,
I don't.
If the state's mandating this, then
It doesn't have to be granted. You're assuming that if anybody who applies, you're assuming that anybody applies is granted it. The administrative officer who's reviewing it, the zoning, you don't have to grant it. It's upon an affirmative determination. If the person who's reviewing it says, okay, it's reasonably necessary for the enjoyment, it's not going to do it, it's not going to cause any problems, then that person can grant it. That is true. And in fact, instead of 30 days, the neighbors only have 14 days to object from when they get the notice. On the other hand, the notice is going to go regular mail, so they'll probably get the notice much sooner than they would in certified mail. But it's always left with the official, whichever one of these people here is going to be, to say, no, we're not going to grant you this modification. Go to the zoning board if you want it, which is what they have now. It's for situations that we look at and say, you know, it's like that little side yard, and there's a wetland next to it, and it doesn't make it, you know, there's nothing there, or there's a street, and it's a side yard. It's the things that we say, well, the board's gonna grant that anyway, and it can be granted administratively. But it is possible for the officer to say no, and then it goes to the zoning board.
But there's 4 standards that the
Right.
zoning official has to
Right.
make. And that's a
Right.
very difficult position for the zoning official to be in, to make a determination that whether or not the modification is reasonably necessary for the full enjoyment of the permitted use.
Which it never is.
Well,
If
or-
the modification is granted, the neighboring property will either be substantially injured nor its appropriate use substantially impaired.
Right, I mean, that's the one you're gonna do when you get the 40-foot house on the coast, on the beach. That's the one you're gonna say, this would impair, substantially injure or impair the appropriate property.
How do you ever answer positively to the first one?
Pardon me? I don't know, the usual one is like a garage, a house that was built without a garage in 1900. And now, having a garage is something necessary for the full enjoyment of a single-family house in today's.
I would never do that.
I mean, well, the question is, how big is the garage? If they want to, you know, and even there, the administrative officer has the power of, zoning enforcement officer may apply any special conditions to the permit as may, in the opinion of the officer, be required to conform to the intent and purposes of the zoning ordinance.
To the permit.
Right, well, so they can say, no, you know, that someone's come in for a 2-car garage, and saying, you know, no, you do need some width relief here because of your side yard, your unusual lot shape, so we're only gonna approve it for a 1-car garage, not a 2-car garage, just as the zoning board would do.
But Mr. Tice, it's just me and my wife, and we have 2 cars.
And then you should be buying a house that's got a 2-car garage, you have a house with no garage.
And you should have bought so the argument would be made by the neighbors, you should have bought a house that accommodated the addition of a
So
garage.
let them make that argument before the zoning board. I'm saying it doesn't have to be a yes. It's not an automatic. There are a lot of things in here that the state law has said are yes. You know, if you don't like the special use permits, if you don't have the standards and it's allowed as of right, too bad, forget about it. There are things that are done, but this thing is one that is turned to administrative, but administration can still say no.
I don't,
And can administration be expanded? I know some communities are talking.
Yes, you can apply, you can appoint more than one administrative officer.
it's a zoning officer, though.
Right, well, you can also change the various, the zoning officer doesn't have to be the building official.
No.
That's a historical anomaly that exists in a lot of places.
Can I ask a silly question?
But I do believe.
What is it that the planning board needs to do here? Because it sounds like there's a set of laws.
I simply was just bringing out this. Now, what Andy was saying about, like I said, for setbacks and all that other stuff, I think it's fine. I do think it's fine. But the building height, if people aren't paying attention, it could be,
But I mean, so there is a process out there that says, you know, you notify your neighbors. If nobody complains, it's the administrative officer. If people want a public hearing, there's an opportunity for that to come before the planning board. So there's a process.
but you have to put the zoning official in the position to take a stance against it.
I'm on the
according to
planning
these-
board. I don't care about this.
Right, yeah, I know, but under those 4 things, and as a former zoning official in a fairly difficult town, I understand what that situation feels
I
like.
guess it's a complex issue. I'm just saying, if we're going to talk about it, what can we do? What do we need to decide?
Whether you want to go at 15% or 25% or any number in between.
2.5.
Can we make any,
Between
15,
15,
25.
15 is the minimum that's gonna happen no matter what, whether you do nothing at all or not. 25%, you have the ability to have it up to 25%. So that's your choice, that's the decision the planning board has to make. Do you want 15? Do you want 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, or 25? That's your decision to make what percentage you authorize the zoning enforcement officer.
no, Andy, because it is under the term dimensional requirements, is there any way for us to separate, to make building height an exemption somehow creatively?
No. I don't know how you can say the height isn't a dimension.
We specifically can't say that modifications for building height shall follow a different process. We have to follow what's written here.
Exactly. All you can do is if you want, and I mean, I think we talked about this in connection with, a couple of years ago with when they changed the definition of height to include the base flood elevation, the thing was, well, let's lower the height, lower the allowable height to begin with, lower the base, and that's about the only thing you can do.
So if I can ask about that variance, I understand the variance on my square footage because some lots are smaller than something you'd like to build. What's the argument for the height, and can we, I think right now we're limiting a building to 2.5 stories. That's the 35 foot, and then now you're adding a whole third story? Like, how,
It depends on where it's located. So if it's outside of a flood zone, it's generally 35 feet, period, whether it's 2, 2.5, 3, but, you know, logistics would say you'd fit 2.5. In a flood zone, it goes by what zone it's in, what district it's in, because we have the coastal resiliency overlay. And so if a property is, and this was, I can't remember when this was adopted, 2019, I think, when we wrote it. If a property is, if the first floor is elevated 5 feet above the ground, we made the height limit 30 for the structure. So there was 5 for a space and 30 for the structure. If that went up to 10 feet above the ground, we dropped the height of the house to 25, so that no matter what, it was still 35 feet above the ground. It was just that you had this area of freeboard or flood zone area underneath that accounted for the difference.
so there's not a way to work the term around the number of stories in a building to limit that? Like, we can't, because a 40-foot building could be right. But a 40-foot building could be a 4-story building next to in a single-family ranchy neighborhood. A 4-story building is a pretty darn big building, right?
You know, like, you're not going to get 4 and 40.
Either way, it's
You're
much
2
bigger
feet
than
above the ground for your first floor. Yeah, you'd be hard.
So
crafting
it,
4 and 40.
so basically, you're talking about 3.5 feet. At 15%, your 35 foot would be a maximum of 40.25, and at 25%, it would be 43.75. That's right. First of all, if
But that's, yeah, the standards are outlined. The standards that the zoning official has to can apply are listed in the new legislation. It's all on the zoning official's shoulders to come up with a determination that they can defend.
And even if the zoning official does grant it, if even one neighbor objects, then it goes to the zoning board. Which is what anybody could do anyway. They could go to the zoning board and ask for this variance at any time anyway.
No, so I'm pretty sure it's anywhere in the community. It goes in the paper. It goes in the paper. Now, the thing that, in my experience with Westerly had a requirement that I believe it went to, I thought it was people within 200 feet, but it might have been everybody in the immediate area of the house, across the street, and at least, and diagonally across. This language just says abutting. So if it's people across the street, I don't believe they have standing. If there's a road in between, would that be considered abutting?
Well, I think there's two things. We've been interpreting a butter to mean within the notice radius, so if it's whatever your zoning radius is, it would be the same. And I think that can be done. You can provide more notice than it's required. So our interpretation is it would, if you'd notify people within 200 feet of it, of the variance request, you would notify people within 200 feet of the modification request. And you just pointed out something very interesting. Standing apparently is for anybody. It simply says, if written objection is received within 14 days, the request for modification shall be scheduled for the next available hearing before the zoning board of review. So it doesn't have to be someone even within the 200 feet.
Again, I think that's where the wording is poorly written,
Yes.
because at that point, the modification is done, and it is now a public hearing.
Yeah. Well, if someone objects to it.
Well, that's what I'm saying, yeah. So the modification doesn't
I
continue.
mean, this wasn't meant for the controversial ones, as opposed to a lot of stuff that was done to allow controversial housing projects to be built, no matter what. I don't believe that this was done for that purpose. This was done simply to try to loosen up some of the red tape with people who are trying to get small relief, the little stuff that clogs the zoning board agendas that, and people have to wait a month and a half to get, 2 months to get to a zoning board meeting to hear it. That was what it was originally done for when it was done in 1991, the modification. But it was too unwieldy, so no one ever did it.
Aren't there municipalities that already implement this?
Yes, yeah, as you heard, Leslie.
Yeah, and I said it works great, but when it was limited to setbacks only. And I think, I understand what the intent of this legislation was and how it came about, but I also don't think they kept coastal communities in mind. And the amount of zoning application and zoning requests and improvements that happen in that area.
With the G-Pod or anything like that, any of those sort of.
Yeah.
Again, the building height is really the only one that truly concerns me.
So I just want to ask,
And this is why it's good that we're talking about this instead of dutifully going through the zoning ordinance, because I think we all need to have a better understanding of what the implications are. And to that end, let you go next. It would be helpful for the board just to have a bulleted list of what you described, one sentence per topic, like modifications, blah, 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 comp permits, minor subdivisions, it would just be helpful instead of 5 pages of.
So that's already been done in the templates with the MTAP. Did we talk about that? Have I talked about that with you? They were released last week, I think.
Something, yeah.
They came out last week, and it's
Great for us to have the.
it's a website. We can send it to you guys, but it's got everything in like a synopsis, 1-page documents for each type of change.
And you do have the 2 memos from Amy from over the summer, which, were synopsis of that stuff as well. Obviously, they were a more high-level view, but giving you the issues, so.
so just one question or comment, I'm not sure what it is. So I don't want to debate and banter the value of this new legislation, but it appears that if things like this are approved by the administrative officer, there's room for arbitrary thumbs up on projects, room for accusations of favoritism or vindictiveness, or if it's arbitrary where I got my relief but he didn't, like how is it settled in such a way that it doesn't feel arbitrary to people who are applying, if it's up to the discretion of one person to approve or deny these variance requests?
It comes down to the strength of the zoning official that's doing the job.
I mean, in most of the world, this is how it's done, and not even the, I'm not saying, in Russia or things like that, but in most of Europe and so forth, it is in fact an official. It is a government official, one person or one office that's making most of these decisions. It's kind of unusual here that we do it this way in the United States. So that's the first thing. The second thing is a lot of these do have the safety valve that if there's a denial by the single official, there's still the board to go to. So, yes, they don't get it as quickly, but there's still that they're not dependent on having to go to court if they don't get what they want this time around. But that's clearly it. I mean, think about, the subdivisions. The fact that the minor subdivisions going to be approved administratively and increasing the size of the minor subdivisions. And that's gonna happen everywhere. I'm not really worried about it in this town,
No.
because you got a good, strong, and well-staffed office. You know, I'm worried about it in Little Compton, where there is 0 administrative officer, just a member of the planning board who has the title, or, you know, places like in the northwest corner where there's, you know, half a planner or so forth. Those are the places that I'm worried about it.
People are worried that planners will start.
These discussions really are kind of new, right? Because we don't have a choice. We have to do this. The only question we really have is it
How we
15%
do it.
or is it 25%, right?
Yes. The 50, 25 is the maximum, and you can choose anywhere between.
And how we manage it, too. If we maximize the administrative capacity, you know, as some communities have discussed, to make it a more
Here, shall permit.
more helpful TRC, that might be a way to have a little bit more impact. Which I think is worth considering,
I'm sorry, it was,
modifying the role of the TRC so that it can act as administration.
Yeah, TRC hasn't been inserted in that administrative process.
But we could, right?
No. It,
Specifically calls out the zoning official. So the zoning official,
Other modifications, what about some of the minor subdivisions and some of the other?
AO. Yeah, AO.
AO with limitations, though.
We should just be really sure about it.
Is there anyone here on the board or staff that would advocate for it? I think we all kind of agree that
okay.
No, again, I stated earlier, that's a knee-jerk reaction that has ripple effects on every existing zone throughout the community.
So, sorry for that. I understand not reducing the town by 15%, but could we zone a section of town, say a coastal stretch, and make that 15% less, so that that can't. To go high? Right, I'm specifically talking about height.
You could
Only reduce height.
reduce height in this R60 zone or the R10 zone. You could do that. I mean, it's not like 35 feet is across the board of the town. The height limit is individualized by zone. So you could do a partial, but again, it opens up a can of worms that is, I'm not even sure I'm in favor of it. And I can recognize.
Again, remember, it's a dimension. So if I showed you, it's 4.5 feet in a 30-foot discussion. It's 1.5 feet for every 10. So it's not even.
No, I think
with
you have to
the
go this
length of
way.
the table.
The conversation is about going this way. And,
Yeah.
and 2 feet, it could be 2 inches and it would seem like it's a 10-foot variance.
Right, but if I put an average person in front of 3 buildings and asked you how tall is that building, is it 30 feet or 34.5? No one's going to see that from 100 feet away, 50 feet away or 25 feet.
Who's the,
Just real quick, is that what the zoning official is expected to tell the?
No, but
neighbor?
I mean,
Because again, I come at this with a little bit of a different experience because I was in the trenches in a difficult place. and
Been
I-
there with you, Jay.
Yeah, right? So you have to, not only is it, well, do we want to allow it? It's how do you face the music? How do you stand tall and tell one person and tell the same story and say, we're going to pick and choose, or we're going to say, you can't see it?
And in a lot of instances, what you're gonna find is, to start off, the AO, whether it's zoning or planning, is very conservative and just says no to everything and makes them go to the zoning board.
Who's the zoning official in town?
Jamie Gorman.
Jamie Gorman. And who's his supervisor?
Jamie Gorman,
There's no one over him.
town manager.
All right. So Jamie says no. He's conservative. He says no. The applicant says, fine, I'm going to go to the zoning board and have a hearing and maybe get you overruled.
Correct. That's the process.
But bottom line, as a town, I think we have to rely on our zoning official to be an upstanding public employee.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and
And this is not about Jamie
no,
Gorman
no, no. that's
or
what I mean,
any
is that
zoning
we
official.
can
Position.
trust this process to work.
That's what I'm saying. In the beginning, most people will be conservative until there's, if you're conservative on decks and people appeal your decision 10 times and the zoning board approves that variance 10
Might
times,
change.
then 18 months later, you may start approving 2.5-foot dimension variances. You're gonna learn over time. Andy mentioned the UK. Yeah, there's 100 years of track record there. In other states and municipalities, you learn. Jay, as a zoning enforcement, other municipalities, you learn as time went on where the litmus test fell.
So in this initial stage here, the town manager directs Jamie, if he's not already conservative, to be a little bit conservative. Let a few of them go to the zoning board, see what happens. I mean, but there's a process, and we'll get to see the results. And
Well, also presumably, the zoning officer goes to every zoning board meeting.
he knows what's
So he's already knows
where the wind blows.
from, we don't have a brand-new zoning officer. He already knows what they're likely to approve or not approve anyway, based on his experience with it. I think you're right. If we got a brand-new zoning officer who came in, that would probably say, oh, I'm going to deny things until I see what they do with them. But when someone's been here for a while, they've already seen it.
So just so I understand, if the public is writing letters or waving pitchforks, it's no longer just the administrative officer, it then automatically is a hearing.
Right. They don't have to
So if
wait
there's a
pitchforks.
bunch of
All they have to do is
protests-
say one letter, I object to this modification. And it goes to the zoning board, just like it would today, it would go to
Okay.
the zoning board.
Andy, what wasn't clear is, does the zoning board have to, does the AO's determination become void, and then it becomes a full variance
Yes,
application
yeah,
before
it's
the
not,
board?
it's not an appeal. That was the other thing, you kept talking about appealing to the zoning board. It's not an appeal to the zoning board. It's just a regular application to the zoning board, if anyone objects.
So again, clear, so that everybody understands, if one person stands up and says, I'm opposed to this, then the decision of the AO is void, and it becomes an application in front of the zoning board for a variance, in a traditional manner.
But the AO, I mean, so people have 14 days to respond.
Yeah.
So why would the officer make a determination?
No, no, so there's a little play on words there, right? A resident has the ability to apply for a modification. The zoning enforcement officer, the zoning official has to entertain that. They go through the process, the modification process. That means public notice and all of that. The minute the zoning official gets a complaint or gets an objection, the modification is done. And now it becomes a full zoning variance from the zoning board. The only approval that the zoning official would do is in the absence of any objections. They automatically get it. He is then approving it at that point. He's approving the modification because there wasn't any objections.
And we have a similar process in another state with regards to conservation commissions and inland wetlands, that when someone applies, you can get a petition for a public hearing. So, and I'm not clear on the timeframes for the ZEO, for the AO, but in that setting, under that legislation, those commissions just don't make any decisions in the first 35 days, so they don't ever have to undo anything. So if an application comes in, you may see an AO say, well, the notice is going to go out. I'm not going to render my decision till the 14th day expires, because if I do it on the 12th day and it comes in on the 13th day, you know, not that anyone wasted their time, but it already is in another process. So you may see decisions rendered in 16 days after the lapse of that notice.
Jay, what about changes to, procedurally to development plan review?
That is fairly extensive. I'm not exceptionally familiar with all of them, although I've read them a number of times. There are a number of allowances that open up DPR to a number of other improvements, some of which are concerning. Generally speaking, most are not, but again, all it takes is one or two that make you cringe a little bit. And a lot has to do with, a lot of the issue I have with it is the wording. It's not direct enough.
Intentionally vague? Well, Andy, to your point, I did bring my zoning table with me tonight in the event that but I think we should set aside a meeting that we're going to work on this and anything else that we need to do to conform to, so that everybody's ready and everyone has read through the information and is fairly conversant with the topic, unless folks want to go through that tonight, but I don't think everyone has their, looks like Paul has his.
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to get is that, I know I've got a copy of it somewhere, but the longer memo that Amy wrote, if we have that electronically, I mean, I've got a paper copy filed away somewhere, but
And I mentioned this to Brian. I've heard the ADU bill in its original form will be back in January, so the town ought to think about what is best for South Kingstown and how we would like to modify it, correct it, whatever. I know there were some alternates that were submitted, but it would be helpful if communities could be clear about what language in that original bill is unhelpful and why, what the impacts are. So, just as a Jamie, are there any other updates that you have not yet made us aware of?
I want to say not that we haven't discussed in the last two weeks or with council as we're moving forward again. We're trying to wrap up the Weston and Sampson. We're in the process of engaging our consultant for Old Tower Hill, working on regulatory changes, handling permit load. Probably the update is, if everybody's aware, that we, council did have a motion to dismiss the litigation on South County Commons in District 5 in front of SHAB, and that motion failed. So SHAB is in the process of continuing with the hearing and scheduling that.
Yes, SHAB denied all the motions to dismiss as moot, and determined that they're not going quietly into the darkness. They're going to try to deal with these pending issues before the end of the year. And this is sort of teed up first. Now, with a very quick briefing schedule. And Bill Landry said, yeah, oh, don't worry, I can get my briefing schedule done by October 6th. By the 10th, I'll get my briefing, October 10th, and then we have so many days to respond. Not many. But, so October 6th comes and goes, and nothing happens. October 10th comes, and a few minutes before midnight, Bill Landry sends an email, here's brief and attachments and so forth, a Dropbox link to it. And then
Peter goes to look and see what's in the Dropbox, and there's no brief there. There's like exhibits and stuff, but there's no brief. And he says, wait a minute, I didn't get the brief. And so does Steve, Richard, and Chad. None of us got the brief in the Dropbox. And so Bill Landry's supposed to provide it. But it didn't come immediately, which seems to indicate to us that he probably didn't finish it by the time and just said something. So in other words, our time frame to reply hasn't started yet because he hasn't submitted his brief yet. So I don't know whether it will or not, but Chab is going to try to decide that before the end of the
It's just odd, you know, for an entity that didn't meet for, what, a year?
Yeah. I don't know, I don't understand why. If I were fired for the job and said, and I want you to work extra hard the next 2 weeks before you leave, this is your 2-week notice, I don't think I would be doing that. But they seem to be trying to do that. So, little more background on the. Yeah,
So how can we schedule what we need to do? And back to my original question, how many extra meetings is it going to take between now?
I'm gonna ask,
Yes, everyone. Okay. Oh, that's why we're getting.
I mean, we could potentially look at meeting to, well, that's Halloween evening. Yeah, from my perspective, I'm available. It is the 5th. Again, it's one of those unique things. It's the 5th Tuesday of the month. There are a few with small children that may be trick-or-treating.
Well, in order for us to better do what we need to do, we do need to have, I don't think it was BS tonight, I think it's, look at the conversation. Well, we do have some choices that can or cannot be made, and it was worthwhile discussing it. What are we gonna do? And so, yeah, Halloween, probably not the best idea for some people, right? What was that?
Monday the 30th? Monday, November 6th?
Say again what's happening.
the regular planning board meeting? Did that get moved to the Thursday too?
Yes, right, the 26th? And that was
Yes.
because of some school committee?
I got moved to the 26th because of a combined town council and
Lynn
school board.
sent out an email on that to everybody, right? Everybody got that? That we're meeting on the 26th instead of the 24th? Of October, yes.
Yes.
And I was just asking, that's the, so that
we can't shift anything to that.
But what if you had a meeting on Monday?
That was. Oh, no, we can't have it here, but it's a work session. And since it's,
We used to move to other locations, but that was before we had the video streaming.
again, the 7 members sitting around the table discussing.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think, I know putting everything on video is how we want to go, and I'm a big proponent for it too, but if time is of the essence and there's work that needs to be done, there's not a whole lot of options.
How available are people on the 30th?
Monday.
So we want to check with the two members that aren't here this evening. I know that Liz generally has a conflict with certain Thursdays, but
I mean, that's the fifth Monday of the month.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be a conflict with any regular meeting that anybody has. And I can just tell you, looking at the rest of the schedule, I don't see any other open nights with other stuff going in. So,
But you said that council chambers is not available that evening.
No, they're doing AV upgrades for about 10 days, so that, again, that's why we're moving some of our meetings around.
So that we can get through the rest of the work that we need.
But we can look at the Guild, we can look at the rec center, there's a number of facilities we can look at. I mean, we could potentially be at the land trust, there are places we can be at.
The rec center's pretty,
There a conference room down the hall?
there's several. Oh, you mean here? Yeah.
Yeah, that room's tough. It's really 6 to 8 people for that room. Again, between the Guild, Land Trust, Library, we should be able to find something. Again, it's the 5th Monday, so on a programming aspect, things typically are scheduled that way.
We've got the public meeting room at the bike path.
Yeah, the
Everyone
community center.
thinks they're available, and you
Sorry.
check with the other two members.
Okay.
Andy, you're available?
I'm available, yeah. I mean, I'll say this. If we got through it on the 30th, then you could skip the meeting you could skip the other date on the 16th if we get through it all.
Wait, on the 16th?
Your next
Yeah, well,
work
November
session.
16th would be your next work session, and that's when you've got to get your recommendation to the town council.
I see,
So that's your drop dead date.
right. I think
So-
it would be smart to have,
Well, that's why we're trying to fit this extra one in there. So,
So if we're all, sorry, if we're all here and it's 8:30,
Mhm.
and we're all feeling pretty frisky, can we power through this right now? And
do you have your zoning ordinance with you?
no, I want to make a photocopy somewhere. Like, I mean, really, like, we're here. Can we just do some stuff?
I don't think staff is prepared to help assist you through that.
We will be more prepared than we are on the 30th.
can we figure usual 7 o'clock start? Or do you want to try to start earlier?
Anyone up for 6 o'clock?
Yes, absolutely.
Want to try and do like, again, 6 to 8, and if there's a little bit of slippage, it's a hard drop at 9.
Well, we also need the zoning ordinance, you know how the copies were like upside down or weird or something, we couldn't get, we need to have that.
You know, Peter, I'm not sure workload-wise we can get there. What we potentially can do is take those uses and highlight the ones you need to deal with. Instead of looking at 8 pages, we may be able to say, oh, here's a page of it, but you only need to look at these 2 places. Okay, so we'll try and narrow your focus down so that when you go to review it,
Just highlight the S's, because it is relevant to see in certain circumstances what uses are allowed or.
yeah, we would keep all the tables, but highlight the row going across.
And if you were changing this and resending it, can you do it on legal paper so that all the categories are available?
Well, yeah, the way it's set up electronically is not the best. We will do our best to make it so you're looking at a page with column headings. When you go to the next page, the column headings are there, so you don't have to try and figure out what column I'm in.
Jay's going to send us that reference material that you referred to. And then it might be worthwhile just to resend Amy's memo from the summer. So that everyone has it electronically.
So I understand, this is a special use permit, since we don't have standard
No. For the ones that, yeah, oh, yeah, we can. You can.
We can prohibit a use in all zoning districts?
Yes. Other than adult entertainment. Other than adult entertainment and community residence, you can prohibit something in all districts, yes.
Yeah.
And the idea is, if you've got a standard for the special use permit, then we're fine, we can leave it the way it is. It's the ones we don't have standards for, we either want to see if we can make it so that there are no S's in the table, we don't have to come up with standards for them, and then which ones we do want to keep the S, which ones are the ones that, of the ones that don't have standards, which are the ones that we want to keep. And then we have to come up with standards for those. All of us.
All of us.
So
Misery loves company.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, that's a lot of work to.
And being at SNEPA for 2 days and talking to some of our constituents in Rhode Island who are, there's 39 municipalities under the same pressure from the legislator, that some communities are going through the yeses and nos, relying more heavily on the nos, and some communities are just saying, we're going down the box and we're going no, 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 no. The ones we want to come back to, we're circling, because we don't have time to develop specific criteria for, but because January 1's a hard date, we don't want to leave it a yes and not have any standards, because if you leave it a yes without standards and someone applies for it, you might as well, you're handing them the approval because there's no the legislation says you can only evaluate them against the written standards, and with none, it's a special use in process, but there's no criteria to evaluate it against.
That would be nice if we could buy some time to properly write those standards.
Yeah. But you do remember when we have that stack and we have priorities, that if you circle the no's, it may drop,
Well, but that's what we're thinking. I mean, the stuff that you say yes, or the special uses that you say yes or no to now, that doesn't mean you're dooming them to that forever. It just means for the time being. I mean, and I think there are a lot of things that probably just should have been yeses that don't need to be special use permits. And then there are stuff that, just do the no, and you can always, like I said, you may not get back to it right away, but it doesn't mean it's that way forever.
Well, you remember how long Phase 2 zoning took. You're right. Remember that well.
I understand. There was a month that I came to South Kingstown 10 times for night in 1 month. We had a total, not including that. So I won't forget that month.
And Madam Chair, just as one final update, and I'm not sure if the email went out yet from Lynn, but we have an opportunity to register all of you with Rhode Island APA as a group rate, so we are in the process of doing that. It used to be $25 a person. We're doing everyone for $100. So, in the next few months, you should all be members of Rhode Island Planning Association, which is under the auspice of National American Planning Association.
There are webinars that are really good that are available.
Right.
Okay.
So,
Motion to adjourn?
If we have to.
Second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Grab some apples on your way.
bad news is we have another night. But the good news is we